The Sofia Gray Show.
Hello, listeners and kinky friends. Welcome to the Sofia Gray Show, where we discuss all things sex, kinks, and fetishes. From the sex stories to the latest trends in the erotic world, we talk taboo transparently. This podcast is brought to you by Sofia Gray, the largest used underwear marketplace. I'm Tracy Bust.
And I'm Lacey Bloom.
And today we're talking to Erika Moen. She's a comic book artist known for her autobiographical comic Dar and the weekly sex education webcomic Oh Joy Sex Toy. Hello, Erika.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
We're so excited to have you here. So first, we would love to know more about you. I remember years ago when, is it Dar, D-A-R?
Yeah,
Dar. When Dar first came out, I was like, oh my God, web comic on the web.
Yep. I remember those days.
Yeah. So do you want to talk about, before we get into Oh Joy Sex Toy, which is so fun, if you want to talk about your career and how you got started in webcomics?
Yeah, so it's been kind of an accidental career. I kind of fell into it backwards. So way back in the day, in the late 90s, early 2000s, I started making friends on the internet, as you do. And there were these art forums, and there was a handful of guys who were doing webcomics. And it was all very new. It was like, wait, these guys they're just doing a comic and putting it on the internet because they can? It was totally novel, totally new idea. And I was, and they were in their mid-20s, so they were old people to me. I was a teenager in high school on these little art forums, and I made friends with other little art nerd teenagers, and we would post our artwork to each other, and they started doing their own comics, and my crew, a lot of them had their own ideas for fictional stories. And so they were telling, there was Bite Me by Dylan McConis, and Return to Sender by Vera Brosgol, and oh crap, what was it called? Strings of Fate by Jen Wang. And to this day, I cannot come up with fictional stories. My brain just does not work that way. And the only thing I know how to do is tell autobio stories. So they were doing these webcomics. They were getting a lot of attention for that. And I was like, I want attention.
Sure. Don't we all?
I want to be part of the cool kids. So I started doing these goofy little autobio comics that was just about my life and the mundane, but also the ridiculous. And it was mostly lighthearted, mostly not terribly serious. I mean, I would do some comics where it's like, man, I'm real sad right now. My girlfriend dumped me again. But and that's the other thing is I had just figured out. I finally figured it out. I was a lesbian. Nailed it down. This is what I am. Absolutely got it figured out. So I was doing comics like, hey, I'm gay. Here's my life with I've got my first girlfriend and we're being super gay together and and I was just putting these ridiculous short comics on the internet, on my website, and this was before social media, so all of my readership came from just people who heard about it word of mouth, and it was small. The people who were reading it were people who were basically shared something in common with me, so I was very much reaching kindred spirits like minds, so other young queer kids, other people who had ridiculous senses of humor, who liked dick and fart jokes. And then plot twist, I fell in love with a guy.
No.
I know. I'm a lesbian. So I had to do comics that were now like, wait, I like this guy, but I thought I was a lesbian. What's happening? So I was doing all these comics, just kind of figuring out my sexuality as I went. And the way I was doing comics back then was a lot like how people initially used Twitter in the beginning. Not like it is today, but it was just like, oh, I experienced something. I'll just tell the internet about it. Meh. Not even really going to think about it that hard. And so I was just kind of day to day documenting, oh, here's this thing I thought about. Here's this experience I had. Here's blah, blah, blah. And I wasn't thinking like I am creating a chronicle of my life. I am creating an important piece of internet history that is going to be documented and analyzed and read and dissected. And like it was just my version of Twitter back in the day.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's how I got my start. That's how I got known for, was doing this autobio comic.
That's so fun. I love that. And I feel like so many things that you mentioned are things that I totally connect with, in that I feel like when you're a kid and you're growing up, at least I will say in our generation, like I can't speak for, the youngsters today, but that, I feel like comics and cartoons were such a big part of at least my childhood experience,
Oh,
that
yeah, me too.
it's so amazing that you created something that, even though this wasn't necessarily the intention, that kids could kind of grow up with these experiences, that your body's changing and you're experimenting with your sexuality and everything. It's the cartoons that teens need.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
people need as they're growing up.
I think comics are an incredibly powerful, subversive form
Yes.
of, well, I want to say education, but that's a really kind of like academic word, but of communicating information.
Yeah.
Because people just read comics without even thinking about it. And if you gave somebody, I always think of this example I had when I was walking down the street this one time, and this guy was handing out leaflets, and they were dense with this densely typed text that was talking about how, the government is wrong or whatever. And I was like, oh, thanks. And then I just threw it out the minute I got to a trash can.
Right. Of course.
But the thing is, like, if he had done that in comics, like, there is this really crazy guy named Jack Chick, who he might actually be dead now. I don't know. But he is a nut. He's one of those Christians that's like, oh, Catholics aren't real Christians. Catholics are going to hell. Like, he's that kind of Christian.
Sure.
He's the D&D is satanic kind of Christian.
Mm.
And he also makes these tracks that he passes out for free, but he does them with comics, and he's actually a decent cartoonist. Not great, but good enough. And because he spreads his crazy through comics, like, people collect them, they read them. And so all these people who would normally like not be exposed, wouldn't bother with this kind of rhetoric that he's shouting out, like, they seek it out because they're like, what is this crazy thing? This is so interesting, and it's in comics. And so, like, comics are this really powerful way to get your message read by people who wouldn't necessarily already be on your side or share your ideology. And of course, Jack Chick is a really bad example because he's using comics for crazy Christianity.
Right.
Yeah.
But I mean, still
but it can
kind
also
of
be used for good stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of which, Oh Joy sex toy.
Oh joy.
What did you think of that segue? I thought it was pretty.
I thought it was great. Very
Yeah.
smooth.
Thank you. So do you want to talk about Oh Joy sex toy, how you came up with the idea, and like what your goals were when you first started it?
Okay, yeah. So coming up with it. All right. So way back in the day, when I was still a lesbian, I did this comic called Girl Fuck, and it was an introduction to how two cisgender women physically have sex with each other and why they would have sex with each other. And it was really basic, and this was pre-Tumblr, so it was we didn't have all the right phrases that we have today.
I miss Tumblr. I miss all the beautiful kinky things about Tumblr.
Yeah.
And so I did this comic that was just like explaining some of the super basic questions that I would get. And so my future husband read it. And when we actually met up, he was like, hey, that was a really good comic. You should do more comics like that. I was like, yeah, no, good call. I'll do it someday. And then when I was doing DAR, I did do a couple comics about like how to pick out a vibrator. But that was it as far as like sex education went. So I finished up DAR, and I really wanted to work on a sex ed book, and like as a textbook with a lot of illustrations. And I worked on it for a year, and then I kind of hit a wall, and I didn't really know what to. I don't know. I just hit a wall with it. And Then I went on a reality TV show, and the the guy who runs a reality TV show, he at the time ran Penny Arcade, which is like the most successful webcomic that's ever existed. It's a $1 million business. And I went on the reality TV show in large part to meet Robert Koo, the business manager. And I was like, I don't know what I'm doing with my career. I don't know what I'm doing with my life. Can you help? And we had a talk. And what came out of that talk was like him saying, you should be doing sexy stuff comics. And so I came back to my husband. I was like, hey, baby, guess what? I got it all figured out. I'm going to do sex ed comics. And he was like, oh, my God. I've been telling you that for like 10 years now.
Oh, I love that.
I know. Like, you have to hear it from somebody you're not married to.
Yeah, of course.
Sure.
Absolutely.
But yeah, so I've always been really, really passionate about sex ed and just the world of sex, because it's so much more than just the physical act of like mushing your genitals together. Sex, it touches on like every realm of human culture. It's covered in religion, it's covered in science, there's a psychological element, there's trauma, there's just like there's so many different things that sex touches on.
Yeah.
Aside from philosophy, and I've got a whole list of like every subject that sex relates to.
Well, you have to, right? To write, and design this beautiful comic that you have that, just goes on and on and on. And there's so many different stories that you're, representing in Oh Joy Sex Toy.
Yeah, there's so much to cover. People ask me, they're like, okay, well, aren't you worried you're going to run out of subjects? And I'm like, no, I'm afraid I can't cover them all. And I can't do them all justice because there's so much more to say than I have space to.
So you have a lot of guest artists, like you ask for guest artists to like create comics, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Can you tell us about that? Like what made you decide to reach out to other artists?
Well, one, primary motivation would be that it's really hard to pump out a comic a week.
Sure.
So I need some people to cover weeks when I can't get it done.
Good for you for asking for help, which so many of us don't do.
Right.
Yeah, as content creators, it's like it's all on you and it's your show and you have to produce the content every single week or whenever it's due. And it's like, that's real hard, yo. You need backup. So just on a personal level, that's where that came from. But then on a more grander picture level, my husband and I, we are what we are. We are white, we're cisgender, we're not straight, but we're in an opposite sex relationship. And so we can talk about our experiences and we can talk about general sex things through our lens, but there's a whole lot more to the world of sex than our perspective. And so it was really, really important. And from the get-go of the comic, it's like we have to have other points of view on here to talk about sex and sex stuff, because we can't do justice to it all. And there's going to be points of view that conflict with each other.
Right.
And we're not the authorities on this. So it's just an absolute requirement when you're talking about these subjects.
I appreciate
to
that.
have other points of view.
Yeah, I really appreciate the fact that you said that too, that you were, and we're speaking as two white, able-bodied women as well, that it's, there's certain things that we will never be personally able to experience from our lens. So
Yeah.
I love, and that's why we love speaking with guests and we love hearing about other people's experiences. And so that's fantastic. I love that you have included other artists with other lens in your, portfolio of work that you've got.
Thank you.
Yeah. So now you also on the site, you have a lot of, can I call them lessons or like chapters or?
Yeah. But all of those work.
Great. Lessons, chapters on different types of kinks and explaining like intro to XYZ kink. And today we are talking about kink shaming on this episode. And so I know that like you wanted to discuss maybe like why people get into kink and like different backgrounds on kink.
Yeah, I mean, and disclaimer, I am not an expert. I like what I've learned is just what I've picked up over time and from talking to people. I'm not like a kink scholar or anything.
Sure, yeah. We're not either.
There should be though.
Yeah.
Where are the kink scholars?
Oh,
like,
they're
is that?
there.
I mean, I want to see that study in university. You know,
Yeah.
like I
Yeah.
love that.
I mean, I think the closest you're going to get are psychology students.
Yeah,
I was just about to
absolutely.
say that. Yeah.
a PhD in kink. I'll take it. Where do I sign up?
Yeah. Where do you think like kink comes from? When you hear of people who are like interested in trying kink, like do you want to talk about like the psychology behind that?
Sure. Okay, so now again, there's going to be many different entry points and many different philosophies.
Absolutely.
I'm speaking totally in general terms and just thinking of like the most commonly found types of kinks and fetishes and whatnot. But at its source, I think generally speaking, kinks come from shame in the first place. So you're taught something like you're taught something is not a sexual thing, and then for some reason you imprint on it, and then because it's forbidden, because that's not an appropriate way to view that thing, it's not an appropriate way to interact with that thing, it turns into this. Your brain takes something that is scary and forbidden and verboten and flips it to become attracted to it and interested in it and sexually aroused and fulfilled by it.
Yeah.
Because you're not supposed to be in the first place. So it's this interesting, it's like those magnets that it's a push and a pull between these two things. You can't have one without the other.
Sure. No, I think that makes perfect sense. And I mean, and obviously, you know, we can talk about sort of where these ideas of kink come from, but I think one of the beautiful things about kink, and it's also one of the frustrating things about kink for people who like that black and white answer, is there's no, you know, specific right or wrong answer about like where kink comes from. We don't have like specific, you know, scientific proof that this is exactly, you know, how someone develops a kink. But I personally find that beautiful. I love that, you know, much like sexual orientation or gender identity, like there's no specific explanation about how someone develops these preferences. So, but I can see also where, you know, people then, because there's no specific answer of like, yes, this is how it happens, it then becomes shameful and it becomes scary and, you know, oh, it becomes wrong. That's the word I always hear associated with kink or fetish is it's wrong. It's unnatural.
Well, and then there's the whole, if somebody has a kink about this thing, then that must mean they want it in real life.
Right.
They really want this thing, this scary, forbidden thing to actually happen to them, or they want to do it to someone in real life. Like they won't be able to help themselves. And I see kink as this, that's very different from that.
Yeah.
Kink is like taking the scary thing and making it safe for yourself.
Yes.
And putting it into a controlled environment where you're in charge and it's consensual and it's safe and it's careful, as opposed to somebody who's just like, oh, I'm just going to go out there and do this thing. I'm just going to act on this thing. I can't help it.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like if there's anything we talk about repeatedly on this podcast, it's always to be safe and to communicate well with, you know, whoever you are playing out these fantasies with, whether it's a partner, a stranger, that, you know, a lot of it is based in communication and safety. So that's something that I think you're right, is that when it does come to kink, it's a much more controlled environment where you can play out these fantasies that you might otherwise not be able to experience. I want to say in real life, like IRL, but yeah, so that it's something that you can control a little bit more.
Yeah.
So like Ojoy sex toy is like this wonderful primer into exploring new kinks. And it's also like this way to dispel shame behind different kinks. And I guess I'm curious, like, what is your experience with kink shaming, and like what advice do you have for people who feel shame because of a specific kink that they're into.
Okay, so right off the bat, I would have somebody sit down and think about why are they thinking about this thing? What is putting this thing first and foremost in their mind? Because there's kink where you're fixated on something because it arouses something in you. And then there's what's it called? Obsessive thoughts or intrusive thoughts. There's intrusive thoughts where people think things that are upsetting to them and they can't stop. And they're like, oh, well, do I want this in real life? And intrusive thoughts are different from having kinky thoughts because intrusive thoughts are there to hurt you and to drive you crazy in an unconsensual, unsexy way.
Yeah.
Whereas kinky thoughts, where you're thinking about something that kind of is shocking and taboo, and you're embarrassed, you wouldn't want anybody to know about it, but it's giving you this thrill at the same time. So it's the difference between thrill and torture.
Yes.
So sit down, think about like, what kind of thought is this? Is this thought thrilling, or is this thought hurting me? And if it's hurting you, go find a sex positive therapist, somebody who is not going to hear about a kink or a sexual desire and be like, or a sexual thought that keeps coming up, and somebody who's going to take that on face value and not be like, oh, well, clearly you're a deviant. Clearly you want to go hurt people. Like, you need somebody who's sex positive who can be like, okay, well, let's really dig into this. Let's really think about this. What does this actually mean? Somebody's not going to try and talk you out of it, but help you figure out how to have a happier brain. Okay, so that's intrusive thoughts. Moving on from that. And then if you're getting these thrilling thoughts, and it's about stuff that like is super not okay in our society for good reason, think about it, research it, and then if you can, try to find other people who are interested in the same thing. And it starts out with a whole lot of research and reading and talking to others, and then you don't even necessarily have to act on these desires.
Sure.
Like, you can just have these erotic thoughts, these thrilling thoughts, and you don't have to go do a scene with somebody else. You don't have to role play. Like, if the thinking about it is enough, dude, that's enough. Or if you do want to go act on it, that's more about networking and finding community and finding partners and being open to communicating with them, and all that.
No, I think that's fantastic. And you said the one word that stands out to me, which is research.
Yeah.
Is like, I feel like whether it's something that you do feel like you want to experience, or like Erika said, if you're simply interested in just thinking about it and that's enough. I think there's, Tracy and I have said it before, we are major nerds when it comes to education and research, especially as far as sex and kinks go. So I would absolutely research what it is you think you're interested in. And because maybe you don't know, exactly what it is. You can't put a name to it. You can't really label it or put it into a box, which is something that, we love to do, is we love to put things into boxes. So, but I think OJoy Sex Toy and sites like, I know OMG Yes supports OJoy Sex Toy, like sites like that as well. They're just full of such wonderful educational resources, including your comics, which I think it's fun. They're fun, friendly ways to really do some research about, things that you might want to have a little bit more information on in the bedroom for you and your partner. So yeah, I always encourage people to seek out and research as much as they can.
Yeah. And I think a general good guideline, because it's so funny to me when kinky people kink shame other kinks that they think are gross.
Yes.
And for me, my guiding principle, and the thing that we apply to when we're hiring guest cartoonists to talk about their crazy kinks is it between consenting adults? Is everybody informed? Is everybody safe? And as long as those three things are met, then okay, go nuts. You're doing play pretend. And as long as it's all adults, it's all consensual, nobody's getting hurt, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. So before we do a little deep dive into kink shaming and why it needs to stop immediately, I thought you would both appreciate this. I found an article published in gaiety.com, and this one was just published days ago, and its title is The Most Common Fetishes in the United States.
So crazy.
Yeah, so this is a very current list, and the way that they gathered their information was based on the top Google search terms per state, and they've sort of broken it down by a fetish map of the United States.
That's awesome.
And I thought, Erika, you would especially appreciate this because you're located in Oregon, yes?
Yes, correct.
Apparently the most popular fetish for Oregon is used underwear.
Oh my goodness.
Really?
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Who knew? I mean, that's crazy. I love that it's so suited for this podcast. Absolutely. Tracy and I are both located in California, and our most popular fetish is wax play.
That makes sense. I see that.
Yeah. So, and it's really interesting because just across, the country, I'm just looking at this map that they've created, and one, questioning what I know about geography, because I'm looking at states and thinking that's Nebraska, right? I think so. But yeah, it really is interesting just sort of seeing the lineup across the different states and the variety. Because I don't want to say no two states are the same, but there is a massive variety between them. And then as far as regions go, in the Midwest, the most popular search terms are group sex and sports gear.
Ooh.
They love their baseball and everything. The Northeast, I found interesting because they had 9 tie. There were 9 of them that tied for the top terms in the Northeast. And I'll tell you the 9 in a second. In the South, it's masochism and suits.
Ooh.
Yeah. some fancy masochism up in the South.
Very 50 Shades.
Dressed up.
Yeah.
Yeah. And apparently in the West, we are just satisfied with masochism.
Yeah. We're
Just
not
basic
pretentious. Yeah.
Yeah. We're not as pretentious as the Northeast,
Yeah.
who has 9 of them tied.
Yeah. Wear what you want.
Yeah. And here you go. Here's the 9 that tied in the Northeast, which were balloons, BDSM, edging, foot fetish, group sex, leather, nylons, sadism, and sounding. So quite a variety in the Northeast.
Go America. We really are a melting pot.
Yeah. So anyway, I just thought I'd share that with you that, it sounds like in Oregon, you've got a lot of folks up there that are looking for those used panties.
Good to know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh gosh. Okay. Now let's talk about kink shaming.
Yeah. I kind of want to delve into it through this perspective. I feel like the latest kink shame is water sports, mainly with the Donald Trump P tape, and then with like all of this exposure about R. Kelly.
Yeah.
I feel like it's this weird thing where I feel like society is more concerned about like the water sports than they are about like the damage that these two people have done to people, and I guess I don't know, like, how do you feel about like there's this mainstream kink shame happening with this? How should people deal with this if it's something that they are into?
Well, I think right off the bat, what Donald Trump and R. Kelly did, I would not count as water sports.
Okay.
I would see that as
Assault and a
Rape.
crime. Yeah.
Yes.
yeah, one assault. I don't know too much about the R. Kelly thing. She was too young to consent.
Well,
right?
it was pedophilia. Yeah.
Yeah. It's,
Mhm.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's rape.
Yeah.
For sure.
Okay, all right. So right there, like, sex is not rape. Those like the actions may be
Yes.
the same. Sex is happening, but one of them is sex and it's consensual, and one of them is assault and rape.
Mhm.
And likewise with water sports, if if you're doing water sports just to hurt someone, just to degrade somebody in a non-consensual way, or you're doing it just because you hate the president so much that you are going to be in the same bedroom that he slept in, so you're going to pay somebody to pee on the bed. Like, that's not water sports. That's just obsessive hate, right?
Yeah, it's true. No, and you know what? I even remember, I think it was when that series came out about the R. Kelly case and everything, that they kept using the phrase sex with an underage girl.
Yeah.
Come on.
I know.
that.
Oh God, I'm like, I think what it is it's less of, it's exactly what Erica's saying, is it's less of, you know, the topic of water sports and more of like, why is that what we're focusing on?
I know. That's what's so frustrating
As
about
opposed
it.
to
Yeah.
the actual, you know, topic of
Violation.
rape or assault or
Yeah.
violation.
And it's like goofy, like he pee, you know, and it's like,
Yeah.
no. And I think like it's that type of shame, which is what I find so frustrating about our society, is that like people are so prone to focusing on the thing that just seems so unusual versus like what is at hand, which is a crime,
Right.
which is, you know, whatever.
Yeah. And that's just one specific instance of kink shaming that I like you mentioned, has been very, very much in the mainstream, because when it comes to kink, it's something that isn't as mainstream. We don't talk about it. We don't put it out there because, and I know, at least from my experience, I take it from the fact that we're told and we're shown from a very young age exactly what sex is supposed to look like and who our partners are and what we're allowed to enjoy, especially as women. So,
And then on top of that, when you've got pee and poop, like from the get-go across the
Right.
board, sex not even involved, we're taught, don't touch that.
Yes.
That's gross. That's dirty. That makes a mess. Clean up. And so, yeah, then you throw those two together.
yeah, exactly. Because then you begin to associate, and I feel like that's why there's so much self shame in kink shaming, is that it's not just what we're shaming others for, but also we're shaming ourselves for the fact that this is something I've been taught is dirty. This is something I've been taught is gross and wrong. And because I appreciate this and because I am attracted to this, there's something wrong with me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and it is important to remember, like, a little bit of shame is needed to make the kink in the first place.
Oh, that's a good
Because
point.
it's being told, like, oh, you're pee, don't get that on your hands, wash it off. Pee is gross, pee smells bad. And if we were taught from the get-go, like, oh, pee's awesome, put your hands in it, we love it, like, it wouldn't be a kink then. But because we're taught, no, don't touch it, that's what turns it into the kink, is when you desire it.
Because it feels like there's two different types of shame here. There's one that's like sexy shame, and then there's the other that's like detrimental shame.
Right.
Good call.
Yeah, because let's be honest, I mean, there's major kinks. And I mean, even at that article I was looking at, there were several states where the top fetish was humiliation.
Yeah.
And there's a difference, though, between, you know, humiliation for sexual pleasure and, you know, just straight up being mean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And straight up humiliation.
Like
That's
cuckolding. Cuckolding is that exactly. Cuckolding,
Yes.
it's eroticizing being shamed. Because cuckolding is when you have three participants. You've got a couple and an outside person, and typically the man, typically with a woman, the man gets off on having his wife, quote unquote, cheat on him with another man. And there's this sense of being belittled and this sense of like, I'm not good enough for her. And there's that fear, that loss of control. And the humiliation of, yeah, you can't satisfy your wife, you can't keep your wife around. And cuckolding is a consensual, erotic game that everybody's in on, and you get to feel the sting of humiliation. But then at the end of it, you know, your wife's like, hey, baby, I love you. I hope you really enjoyed that. And he's like, you were so good. Which is different from cheating. And cheating is unconsensual. And cheating is one person deciding they're going to go do this thing on their own and leave the other person out, no matter how it makes them feel. Like, it's different. It's a violation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is there like other negative side effects to kink shaming that's not just like I feel judged or a group of people like what are some other negative things that could happen when kink shaming doesn't get regulated or called out?
As far as I'm thinking about it in terms of kind of, how do I put this? I think, I mean, we've kind of talked about how it's influenced sort of politics, you
Yeah.
know, which I feel like, you know, that's its own giant to be had. But I think there's also something to be said for kind of the way that kink shaming can affect healthcare.
That's what I'm thinking. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
and child ownership. What's that called when you've got parental rights?
Oh, yeah,
yeah.
that's interesting too. Yeah, no, for sure. Why don't you start there and then we'll continue with the healthcare. What do you have to say about that one, Erica?
Well, this is something I really haven't looked into too much, but generally speaking, I know that like there'll be a married couple and they'll do some freaky shit and they've got kids. The kids are not involved in the freaky shit. And then the couple gets divorced and one of the parents will go to the courts and be like, "Oh, actually, my ex is a total pervert and the kids aren't safe to be in the
Yikes.
house because my partner likes to be tied up or my partner
Yeah.
likes to dress like a baby." And clearly that reflects on their mental capacity and their ability to be a parent. And
Yeah.
the court will be like, "Oh yeah, that is gross," and then the kids will go off to the other parent.
Oh gosh. Yeah, no, I can't even imagine. Like that's, oh man. Yeah. And you know what? It kind of, I'm not sure if they actually like, if this is like a diagnosed thing, but I do think of it as sort of being this like kink phobia or like a kinkophobia sort of thing where, you know, both in the court system, like Erica's talking about, but also, I feel like I've known people who have gone to see therapists and they feel like they can't discuss their kinks or their fetishes with their therapist because even some of them aren't willing to talk about them. They say, "Oh no, I can't talk about that because I feel, you know, dirty hearing about that." And I feel like that has lasting effects. You definitely don't.
Yeah.
You
No, I knew somebody who went to meet a new therapist and they were like, "Okay, so I'm into the super BDSM scene
Right.
and I have a 24/7 dom sub relationship with my partner and it's healthy and good." And the therapist was like, "I don't think I'm the right therapist for you because I'm a feminist, so I don't support that."
Gosh.
I mean, I've even been to a sex therapist who it kind of shamed me a little bit
that's
one
so
time too for
unfortunate.
something that I did, and then I stopped, seeing her. So I mean, I guess it is one of those things of like if you're not coping, or like if things aren't gelling with you and your therapist, just stop seeing the therapist, no matter who they are.
Yeah. And even then, it's like it kind of gives you this idea, as somebody who's like gone to see a therapist for years, you think of this person as being someone that you can talk about anything with. This is a safe space. They don't have to understand every choice you make or, your lifestyle choices, but it starts to make you question then, well, if I can't talk to my therapist about this, who can I talk to? Who of my friends can I talk to about this? Who can I talk about this within my family? Like, because if my therapist feels uncomfortable and doesn't want to talk to me about this, I feel isolated. I feel, I can see depression and anxiety kicking in. It's just this long, what do you call it? One thing leads to another cycle. That, and then the other thing is that and we've read cases of this when health professionals want to sort of treat a patient because of their kink or fetish.
Yeah.
And that's not a thing. It's not going to happen.
Yep.
Yeah, nothing to say but yup. I mean, it really is. It's a yup. I guess, if you want to talk about really large scale consequences as far as kink shaming goes is, violence. Like I feel like a lot of times we make a joke out of it. Like there's a lot of kinks that people will make a joke out of. I mean, a meme. I mean, they'll make a meme out of it or something. Think about
furry, like furry hunting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Whoa, furry hunting?
Or wasn't it? There's that meme. I don't even know, but it was like this meme that was going around that's like, "Oh, I like to hunt furrying and furries." I mean, it was obviously very right wing, not right wing, but you know what I mean. Like,
Sure, shitty.
Yeah, shitty,
Yeah.
like neo Nazi
Ugh.
style bullshit.
But I mean, it's, but people make and it's not just the furries too. I feel like there's so many different kinks that people sort of make a joke out of and poke fun
Yeah.
at. And I mean, I like to think that more often than not, it's because they don't understand it. They're not willing to understand it because, maybe it's, rooted that they are actually interested in something like that as
Yeah.
well. But
And I think it's also like to the extent of like, I was talking about that, like when someone's like to put someone down where they're like, hey, go suck my dick. And it's like, it makes like dick sucking seem like this like sign of weakness. And like, there's a shame in that where it's like, oh, this is a fun thing I enjoy doing. So it's like, joke's on you, I will.
drop those pants, baby.
Yeah.
Yeah, or when somebody says fuck you or go fuck yourself.
Yeah.
It's like those are great things.
Yeah.
That's really fun.
I absolutely will go and fuck myself. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I don't need you to tell me to do it.
Yeah, or like calling someone a pussy for being weak. And
Yeah.
it's like pussies are some of the strongest organs that have been, put on this earth. Like
Very true.
you're not, if anyone's a pussy, it's me. Like I was just looking at our notes here and there was like, I don't think any of us were alive then, but like when Rock Hudson, where people were like speculating on his sexuality. And we still do that with like, John Travolta or like Tom Cruise. Do you know what I mean? Like we still speculate like, oh, I think he's gay. And it's like, we still do that shit.
Yeah. And that ties right into kink shame. I think there's a major part of kink shaming tied to LGBTQ queer, lifestyle. So
Now that I think about it, it's kind of like falls under the heteronormativity umbrella.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think so.
To be straight is to have male, female, missionary style sex, to have a baby, and anything outside of that is
Dirty.
into queer territory.
Yeah. Yeah. No, which is, oh God, so ridiculous. But, which I feel like makes sense then that, I mean, I feel like some of the people who speak the most out about, their kinks and fetishes are members of the queer community. So, I mean, it makes perfect sense.
They've already had to go through the fire. They've already had mainstream society be like, well, you're weird and gross. And they're like, okay, well, if I'm already weird and gross, then I'm going to talk about this other stuff you already think is weird and gross.
Yeah.
And there's no consequence. Well, I mean, not no consequences,
Right.
but like you've already kicked me out of the club, so I got nothing to lose.
I love it. It's like reclaiming it too. Like, you want me to be weird and gross? I'm going to be as weird and gross as I possibly can be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
I think the last thing we really should talk about is sort of instead of kink shaming, instead of judging people based on their kinks and fetishes and their preferences, what are some things that people can do instead? If someone were to approach you and tell you, this is a kink I'm into, how can you respond to that?
Well, I mean, and it does depend on the context and the situation as well. Because if somebody just comes up out of the blue and is just like, I'm gonna tell you about my adult baby diaper thing, and you're like, whoa,
Yeah.
buddy, that's like not here, not I no, stop. Like that, because there is a thing where people can be too forthcoming about their sexual stuff.
Sure.
And it's not okay. Like, you do need to read the room. You do need to wait for it to be appropriate. So like, if you want to talk to somebody about sex stuff, I would actually start with, hey, can I talk to you about this subject? It's totally okay if you would rather not and it's not your jam. Like, feel free to decline.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's consent. But then once you do have that going on, how do you respond? Okay, so like, let's say you've agreed to this. You've said, okay, yeah, sure, tell me about your sex thing. And they're like, here's this crazy thing. And you're like, holy shit. Wow, I do not know how to respond to that. I find that really gross. Like, how do you deal with it in the moment? I think you can ask, like, where does that come from?
Yeah.
What attracts you to that? What do you get out of it? Like, rather than just responding to the on the surface revulsion, like pee, ew, it's like, oh, when did you first realize you're into that? How does this tick your box? Like,
yeah.
Like there's all the questions you can ask about it without going into the specific of, oh, it's pee.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I think like anything else, when somebody asks you questions about something you're interested in, that always makes me think, oh, this is somebody that actually cares about me. This is somebody that cares about, what I like, what I'm into. it's not that different than having a conversation, I feel like, about anything else. Like, and
that's true.
granted, I feel like if it is something that, maybe if it's a friend that's talking to you, one, that's great that they feel comfortable enough with you to confide in you about this kink of theirs. But I think it's also normal for you to say that, this isn't something that you feel comfortable talking about. That's fine. I don't think you have to have this conversation with them. However, I think there is, like Erika's saying, a better way to handle it than just, brushing it off. Oh, okay, great. Pee. That's that. I will say, I think it does depend kind of what context this discussion comes about. Like if you're talking with a friend versus an online community, I mean, we all, I think all three of us sort of thrive in these online communities. We clearly have this whole podcasting community. And, Erika, you said that you got, your earliest starts of, drawing came from, this artist community online.
Yeah, it was how we were socializing with each other. Yeah.
So I think if it is coming, if you are having these discussions with, whether it's online friends, a community of strangers a community of strangers online.
The onlines.
Yeah, the onlines. I will say the one thing that bothers me the most about online discussions is when people decide to comment with like negative comments that just, if it's something that you're not interested in, and it's not your kink, you don't have to say anything. That's absolutely fine. It's so simple. I feel like it all boils down to just don't be a dick.
Yeah.
Like, just don't be a jerk. Because, when you are, it makes people feel bad.
Yeah. Don't be mean.
It's as simple as that, friends.
Yeah. Well, Erika, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It was lovely to meet you.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Can you tell us like where we can find you and what you have next up on the docket?
Yeah, so you can read my comics that I make with my husband, Matthew Nolan, at ohjoysextoy.com. And that's OHJOYSEXTOY.com. And I'm on Instagram at Erika Moen.
Nice.
Erika, somebody already took Erika Moen, and that poor Erika Moen, like she keeps getting all this messages that are meant for me. And it's like, I'm sorry about all the sex toy stuff. I'm sorry about all the sex stuff that comes your way.
She's probably like very informed now and living her best life.
Yeah,
so
she's probably your like best follower at this point. Like, oh, well, this is the other Erika I need to, obviously keep in touch with.
I hope so. But so yeah, I'm Erika Moen on Instagram, and Erika is spelled ERIKA, and Moen is MOEN, and I'm Erika Moen on Twitter. And as for projects, later this year, probably in the spring 2020, Matthew and I are going to be launching a Kickstarter to publish our second Drawn to Sex book, which is Drawn to Sex is a book series that we're doing that collects just our sex education comics from OJoy.
Fantastic.
And we did the first book last year, and that was called The Basics, and that was just like the basics of how bodies fit together. And this next book is on health, and it's all about like STIs and don't freak out if you have herpes, and here's how you get a cervical exam, and just all the health stuff that goes with sex. So that'll be this spring 2020. Nice. I'm sure we'll have a lot of information about it. It's for Drawn to Sex, health. Coming out in another year or so from Random House Graphic will be our book for teenagers called Let's Talk About It.
Oh, cool.
And it is a book about talking about sex. Like not just, hey, teens, this is how you do it. It's like, hey, teens, this is how you talk about doing it. And, how do you talk? What questions should you be asking yourself? What do you question and talk about with your potential partner? Just that kind of stuff. Like it's basically kind of giving teens a dialogue example to use in their own life when it comes to figuring out if they want to try something and what and how and when.
Which is something that I think applies to all of us, even beyond our teenage years.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely.
So I can, say with confidence that I'll be picking up a copy of that as well. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, congrats on, all the books, and we will, continue to love and appreciate your, beautiful artwork.
Thank you.
And we can't wait to see what comes next.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Thank you,
Awesome.
Erika.
Whether you're looking to buy or sell used panties, Sofia Gray has got you covered. If you want to earn some extra cash, you can set up your own shop in minutes and start selling your own used underwear. And they take no commission. You'll keep 100% of every single sale that you make.
If you've got a kink for used panties and you're looking to buy your next pair, look no further. Oh, and the whole process is completely anonymous. Sofia Gray will never share, store, or archive your personal information. The name Sofia Gray won't even appear on your bank receipt.
So head on over to sofiagray.com to start selling or buying used panties now. Until next time, we're your hosts, Lacey Bloom.
And I'm Tracy Bust.
And we're here to say, let them be kinky. There's no kink shaming here.